Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book. Chippa in the third person. Hey everybody, as you can see, I have shaved the giant mess that was going on the top of my head, and I have a chin. Woo! Welcome back. Last night I recorded an episode of Shooting the Shit with Chippa with the folks over at the Geeks with Shields podcast. Got my first actual game with rounds of right quote, wrong movie going on. So each of us had 10 quotes, and each person had a chance to get the quotes given to them and pick a favorite, just like you'd play in Cards Against Humanity and other games in that style. And it was awesome. We also did an episode where I learned about Warhammer because I have a passing relationship with it from friends that used to work at Gamers Workshop when I was younger, and I wanted to know more, so they gave me a good introduction, and we'll probably do more episodes like that because I find it very interesting, and they're really into it. If you go over to the Geeks with Shields podcast, at Geeks with Shields podcast on Twitter, they're on patreon.com/geekswithshields. They're on SoundCloud. They'll be on Podbean soon. They do episodes on Warhammer as well on their show, so check that out. What do I got to talk about today? So I have been looking into the new Twilight Zone hosted by Jordan Peele. I've been through the first two episodes. The first episode is called The Comedian. It stars Kumail Nanjiani, the actor and writer of The Big Sick and other things. He's fantastic in this. And the second episode is a new reimagining of Terror at 30,000 Feet, which has increased in the titles. It was on the original Twilight Zone with William Shatner. Then they did it in Twilight Zone, the movie with John Lithgow, and both of those were quite similar, with it being a gremlin on the wing, and this one uses a different twist, which I'll get into. So if you haven't watched any of the new Twilight Zone, you should, but spoiler alert if you haven't. So the first episode, The Comedian, is fantastic, in my opinion. What a great way to start off the show with a classic Twilight Zone style episode. You've got Kumail Nanjiani doing what he seems to do in everything he shows up in and playing a comedian. And in this one, he plays a comedian whose material is just not landing well. He's trying to do political humor, he's trying to do social humor, but none of it is really about himself, none of it is very revealing, and he's getting down on himself, and all the other comedians in the place make fun of him. And we've added into the story that there's a comedian who's his friend, but also kind of bickers and shits on him, who's a woman, who's another one of the comedians there. And then there's this heavy-set guy, Joe Donner, and I see the name Donner show up as a through line in both. There's Captain Donner in the 30,000 Feet. I'm wondering if that is a nod to Richard Donner, the director, or maybe the Donner Party, with the oncoming doom kind of a thing. But this guy, Joe Donner, is a comedian who went drunk driving and crashed and killed a mother and her baby. And it's right outside of either the club or Kumail's apartment. I think it's right outside of his apartment. No, it's right outside the club because he notes it later. So he's back at the bar one night after a really bad set, and he's met by Tracy Morgan. And I gotta say, I think Tracy Morgan seems like an absolute freaking blast of a person. I'm hit or miss on his comedy. I feel sometimes it's really forced and almost so ridiculous, and I'm so sloppy, and I almost seem like I'm drunk that it's funny. But in this, he's playing a very, very serious role, and I want to see him do more of this. If maybe I'm missing some serious roles from Tracy Morgan, please point me to them. I'd love to check out more that he's done, especially if it's gone in this route. But he plays the exposition deliverer / potential evil being in this episode, where the idea is, okay, you're this comedian. I think it was J.C. Sweeney or J.C. Sheeny or Sheehan, and he's like, oh my God, it's so great to see you. You kind of disappeared. Nobody knew where you were. And he had said he has something to allude to something ominous, but I forget what it is. But he goes with, so what do you want from this? He goes, you're set, you're doing it wrong. You got to be more personal, make it be about you, and people will laugh. And he's like, yeah, but doesn't that seem like a little bit of a, lowball, a little bit of a cop-out? And he goes, listen, if you want it all, you have to give of yourself. And if the people connect to it and the people receive it, you'll get everything you'll want, but you'll lose it. And it is kind of left ominous as to what that means. So he goes back out there the next night and does a bit about his dog, and the crowd goes wild, even though the jokes aren't really all that funny. He's just kind of saying the name of his dog and things his dog has done, but everybody in the place is losing it. And goes home later that night to his girlfriend, so excited that his set went well, and when he mentions their dog, the dog doesn't exist. And you kind of see where this is going. And then he does a joke about his nephew who comes and visits him, and the nephew disappears with like a cool mic feedback noise, and then he looks out and the nephew's gone. And the thing is when these things disappear, it's not just like he kills them and everybody's looking for them. He's the only one that knows they existed. And so everybody else, it's like they were never there. So the stakes get higher. He starts going and saying, I have a bit of a power here. Starts doing jokes about people he didn't like in high school. Starts doing jokes about the other comedians, i.e. Joe Donner, who killed that family. And now all of a sudden, the bus stop he crashed into is back together, and he's like, oh, cool, I saved a life. I got rid of a scumbag. But then when he does a joke about the mentor of his girlfriend, who he feels is a little bit too into his girlfriend, all of a sudden, the girlfriend doesn't have her great lawyer job, because how would she have gotten it without her mentor? She works at a diner. And a lot of this is very similar to, films like The Butterfly Effect, Back to the Future. It has that kind of, you erase something, what else do you affect kind of a thing. And I really liked the building of tension, and I really think that he's a fantastic actor, and he does like the everyman thing really well. And his descent into insanity near the end is pretty great. And the eventual reveal of what he ends up doing when he realizes he's ruined it for everyone is he just makes the humor of himself, i.e. the last thing is to give of yourself, and disappears. And then there's a great allude to The Shining at the end, where he is now in the audience of a painting on the wall of all the comedians at this club. So, top-notch episode, great way to start it off. Oh, and Jordan Peele, how is he as the host? He is doing absolutely fucking awesome. When he comes on, it has, it has a grandiose to it that rivals the fun that Rod Serling. It's a different take on it, but I really like it. I love the way they interleave him into the episodes. It's all really cool. So, then we get to our next episode. How does Terror at 30,000 Feet hold up? Well, mostly, I really dig it. I just don't... I'm not sure if I'm really buying the last few minutes of it. We'll say. And, get into the comments and tell me what you think. So, Terror at 30,000 feet, I'm going to try to talk closer because when we get on the highway, the car gets loud. Sorry, everybody. I don't have the windows open. The car is just loud as shit. You know what? Maybe I'll just hold it or do something like this so you guys can hear me better. This is probably really illegal, but I'm doing it anyway. No, I'll put it back. I don't want to freak anybody out. So, Terror at 30,000 feet. So, the original Terror at 30,000 feet was a post-World War II thing where everybody was afraid of gremlins. William Shatner thinks there's something on the wing. Sees a gremlin on the wing destroying the plane, and eventually, the same thing in the John Lithgow version. Eventually, they're, both kind of apprehended and made to calm down. Plane lands, and they cut to a shot of the wing actually with all the claw marks and everything in it. And yeah, he was absolutely right. It's fucking fantastic. It's very classic. So what do you do for a third time? Well, they remove the gremlin, and instead they make it be about this guy who's an investigative reporter. He's obviously worried about flying. He's coming back from Tel Aviv. He's on the phone with his girlfriend, who's obviously worried, or wife, I would say, who's obviously worried for him. Something in his past didn't go well, so it's all about leaving the past behind him. And he finds an old, Zune-looking thing, or an old, I would assume it's supposed to be a Zune or something like that. It looks like a Zune. in the compartment in front of his seat on the plane, grabs a pair of flight-given headphones because his, Bluetooth ones he's been wearing won't work. And this guy he met earlier in the episode is also on the plane. That becomes important later. Whether or not that guy actually exists or not is kind of where I'm going in my head. But anywho, so he picks up this Zune, turns it on, and also earlier in the episode, the flight is flight 1015. It's leaving on October the 15th, and the flight's supposed to leave at 9:30 and gets delayed to 10:15. So we start seeing these patterns. And he picks up the podcast and turns it on, and it says the mystery of flight 1015, to which the podcaster starts describing the events of the flight that he's on, and basically saying that this flight is going to disappear at 11:15. And so he starts kind of freaking out, bothering, kind of doing the same stuff that in the other two episodes, freaking out the passengers. The Zune, the podcast reveals that there could be, Russian criminals on the plane that are going to get taken out by the mafia. All of these fun red herrings and everything, until it leads to the fact that 1015, he deduces, is the code that gets him into the cockpit. There's a guy he's been talking to, is a pilot that hasn't been flying anymore. He says, I don't do that anymore, too many mistakes. After all of this goes down and he's tied up, the guy comes to him and says, okay, I have a plan. I can get in there and take control of the plane. I believe you. This plane's going to go down, and I'm the only one that can help you save it. That guy gets into the cockpit, violently dismantles the pilots, which starts looking a little weird, and says, he's going to drop the cabin pressure, knock everybody out, and he'll take control of the plane and fly them to safety. Until it realizes that he says, hey, I needed to work out those demons from my past, and so did you. You know what I need to do now. Thank you for this. And obviously now this guy is going to crash the plane. So, don't really have an issue with everything leading up to that. That's actually pretty cool. The paranoid guy is the one that actually sets in motion the events that he's afraid of and that this podcast is alluding to. Pretty cool stuff. Different take on the material. What I don't like is the epilogue, the aftermath. It's very problematic, and I'll explain why. And it's a very Twilight Zone kind of epilogue, I get it. But there's a lot of things in it that bother me, and I'm going to try to explain why. So he wakes up on the shore of a remote island, and he finds the podcast, turns it back on. Somehow it survived the plane crash. That's not even the thing I'm bothered by, because that can happen. Turns it on, and they say, that was our most popular episode. The follow-up is what happened in the aftermath. They spent 2 to 3 months looking for the plane, and when they finally found the plane wreckage, they found that every passenger aboard the plane had survived except for one. And the one is our protagonist. Now, before I get to what happens to him next, let me just say, okay, so this is obviously setting up the fact that he is going to die. Has he done anything that's deserving of death? I know that the Twilight Zone, this happens to people often, but usually there's something in their past that they've revealed that's like, okay, you have some repercussions, but him just being paranoid, him being an investigative reporter, and the Jordan Peele thing afterwards is maybe the person he should have been investigating was himself. It feels just a little bit cheap. Maybe I'm missing something, but that line, the way they close it up, and the fact that the passengers all come out of hiding and blame him for the crash and kill him. Now, why wouldn't they blame the guy that broke into the cockpit and took control of the plane? The passengers see him on the closed circuit TV, which why the plane has this, maybe this is a new thing I don't know about, but that's also a little weird. I can see why they would do it, but so far, so forth, whatever. Moving on from that. Why are they blaming our character? Okay, he's been running his mouth and they've been saying, he's been threatening the plane, so maybe the people all passed out and came to and just want to point blame at something, but they said every passenger survived. So wouldn't that mean also the guy who took control of the cockpit, who it looked like he may have killed the pilots, but maybe he didn't? Wouldn't the guy who took over the cockpit have been a passenger noted on the plane? He wasn't a air marshal. They established that. So he would have been on the manifesto. So how come they're not blaming him? And how come he's not shown in that last shot? Unless our main character is him. And so it's him that breaks into the cockpit and tries to fly the plane. But that makes even less sense, I think. So I wish that epilogue had never happened. It's a classic case of end it there. His own paranoia got the best of him. It looks like flights sometimes take a stop off in the Twilight Zone. Great. No need for any further explanation. Also, the episode does this thing where it over-explains itself. When the guy realizes that the guy takes over the cockpit and then says, "Good night, New York." That's the line that the podcast says is the last thing the pilot said. And he goes, okay, he's the pilot. And it's like, all right, we don't need that explained. Stop that show. So this episode, I'm not going to give it the highest rating in the world. I think it's clever. I'll give it a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Why I'm rating things now, I don't know. The Comedian's more of a 9 out of 10. And the only reason, if it didn't have that ending, it would move up a little higher, because I love the idea of the guy getting paranoid over a podcast that's depicting what's going on in his life. But I'm sure I'll be watching more of these, and I'll have more on the new Twilight Zone on upcoming episodes. Until then, this has been the Chippa. I'll see you guys on the other side. Bye.